the kind of person that's been thinking about getting into variegated plants, but are always a bit unsure based on what you're hearing from everybody, they're really fussy and you need to baby them and you need to cut them back when they're starting to lose their variegation, so you're not sure if you want to take that leap. Stick around with me and I will show you what I think is the best variegated philodendron. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So I said best philodendron, or best variegated philodendron, and I will quantify this. Actually, before I do any of that, hazard a guess? Do you want to guess? Let me know in the comments down below before you watch the rest of the video, and hopefully I won't put it in the title, I can't promise it. If I do, just ignore this section because I'm an idiot apparently. But which philodendron do you think I'm going to be featuring today that is a variegated philodendron, that is easy to care for? That's why I was kind of saying the best element there. Alright, taking a guess? Cool. So as I was saying, the reason why I said best is because in my experience, and it has changed since owning this plant, this is one of the easiest, least demanding, relatively vigorous growing philodendrons, let alone variegated philodendrons, but also one of the easiest variegated plants I have ever owned. So without further ado, you might have guessed correctly which one it is, and it's looking quite large and sizable. I will bring it in so you can see it's one of its newest leaves. Oh, I mean, that is actually this newest leaf, apologies, this one right here, and it's got some of that speckling on there, and that's what can happen with this plant as well. But oh, when you get this, and you do, I'm trying to find, so there's another one there, this one is dulling down. So for the people that guessed philodendron Jose Bueno or Jose Buono, you would be 100% correct. And some of you might remember a review video that I did that I will link at the top where I pretty much poo-pooed on this plant most of that video, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, I might be wrong, I was kind of saying I'm probably the one that's doing something wrong with this plant because everybody else that is growing it has had great successes and it's fast for them and it's got variegation and its new growth point is right there, and there is a tiny bit of cream at the top there, so I don't know whether or not majority of that leaves. Oh no, there's cream further down below. Anybody else do that? When you kind of look at the unfurled leaf, especially when it's variegated, and just go, ooh, am I going to get some white there? Am I going to get some white there? I'm going to get so much white or cream. Ugh. But yes, this plant has changed in my opinion a lot, and I was debating whether or not I do this as a review, but I'm just like, you know what, let's do this a bit more casual. Let's just talk through what I think of this plant from a variegated standpoint. And as I said, I do think that this is one of the best variegated philodendrons in terms of ease and non-fussiness, and it just keeps doing its thing and it keeps bringing leaves like this which are absolutely stunning. Thoughts? What are your opinions? Am I right? Am I wrong? We're all allowed an opinion, so you are allowed to disagree with me, you're allowed to agree with me as well. But the thing, and some background for the people that maybe haven't seen that original review, I kind of really poo-pooed on this because for me, I got it as a single leaf cutting and it really wasn't growing particularly well. It was very, very slow. It took nearly 1.5 years to nearly 2 years to activate. And again, I am in the minority for that one. Another good thing that's happened recently is I have started to see this being sold in some garden centers and plant stores as baby plants, and it is so stinking cute, and it's really, really affordable at the moment. I think at least here in the UK I'm seeing it for under double digits, which is fantastic. I don't know because I've never grown it from a very, very small kind of plant. As I said, it had like one leaf maybe that had very little variegation on it. and some kind of aerial roots, and I had to root it out and do what I needed to do. It took forever. It is not on a moss pole. I probably should have it on a moss pole. Some of the negatives that I will say, which might be obvious from this video, its growth pattern is wide. So bear that in mind. But do you want to have a look at some rootage? How about that? How about the fact that this probably needs a repot? But at the moment, I don't know if anybody else does this. Do you kind of grow, especially if you've got things like hash poke, because there's a tiny bit of water in there. This is kind of almost growing like a self-watering pot with a bit of soil, because these roots are just sitting in a bit of soil, whatever water has kind of, water that's kind of dropped in. And I do refresh this, as in like I empty this out every time, so it's whatever water is dropped in. Does this need a bit of a clean? Probably. But yeah, and it just keeps being happy. So essentially, I think most of these at this particular moment in time are water roots. The roots in here are fine, but yeah, like, but it's a vigorous grower. And part of the reason why I am not repotting it right now, I probably should, as I said, it might, I don't know, does anybody else get this in like kind of July, like mid-July, where you're just like, oh, is it too late now? Are we kind of like halfway through the kind of really, the joke that is meant to be summer right now in the UK. Hopefully the weather turns at some point before the summer is over. But yeah, do you ever kind of wonder and go, have I missed the boat now? Should I have done this in spring, and then it has all of summer and spring to kind of get used to new pots? Because if I move it in now, we're just about to go into winter soon, which is a bleak thought considering we've not had summer properly yet here in the UK. Shoot me now. But yeah, I don't know with this plant whether or not I should do it. Let me know. What do you think? What do you think? Is it robust enough that it shouldn't really have an issue? In terms of pests, and another reason why I'm kind of putting it on here, it hasn't really had very many. Maybe the occasional mealybug, which in here is kind of a normal thing. But it's been fine for pests. Another reason why I like it is because that variegation is very consistent. I think of this almost a bit as a Monstera Thai constellation. I mean, the speckling is kind of similar as well. The thing that you do need to remember about this plant, I'll show you some of the older variegated leaves without like completely destroying this plant. I understand now why other YouTubers find it so difficult to film with this, because it grows in a really awkward way. It does dull down. So when it first comes in and it's quite creamy like you'll see here, but it does go down to like a lighter green. That might be a deal breaker for some people. I don't mind it with this plant because it just means it does its thing. The other thing that you might notice, this is not a leaf that I've cut. That is the white section, that is the green section. This is one of the first kind of good variegated leaves that it pushed out in my care after it rooted. But it had this thing, and I think I asked in that review if other people have had this, and they have. Sometimes when you get that kind of half moon, that entire kind of creamy section might be a lot smaller than the rest of the leaf, so you get that kind of deformation happening there. But it's stable, at least in my experience. I might be wrong, you might turn around and say this is not a stable variegated plant. In my experience, I've not had to cut this back down once, and it just does its thing a bit like the Thai constellation. It is fine. Now you might be able to notice, if I swing this around, aerial roots for days. Some of these here have kind of left on there and they've crisped up. Should I be growing this up a moss pole? Is anybody growing this up a moss pole? Possibly it might do well, but to be fair, the leaves aren't getting any smaller. And the other thing that I will say, okay, so in terms of light, this does get a lot of bright light, almost bright direct light, but bright light that is slightly filtered in the sense that it sits at the very top of a plant shelf, which most of these leaves are touching the top of my conservatory, the glass. Granted, I have put in that kind of greenhouse paint, so it is opaque, but that is literally the only thing that is keeping this plant's leaves away from scorching light. That is it. not a single leaf has damage from cold, because the winter, you need to think about the winter with this plant as well, when it's that close to like kind of a window. Not a single leaf has got burn marks. This has taken to things like fertilizers completely fine. Sometimes you get with some variegated plants, you might get some chemical kind of burning on the leaves, and I don't remember what exactly it's called at the moment. But you know the ones I'm talking about. Sometimes when they absorb or there's too much fertilizer in the soil, you start getting kind of almost like bullseye kind of black with yellow rings around it. And sometimes that might be fungal as well. But nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's just been a workhorse. It's been fantastic. And I haven't tried propagating it yet. It is probably getting to the point where I will need to propagate this. The reason why I have avoided doing this is for however much I love this, because of the way that it grows. I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to, because I just don't have the space for it. And I mean, I could do the usual propagation that people do to make it a bit bushier. So cut a bit, root it out, and put it into the same pot, and you get a bushier plant. I don't know, this is wide enough as it is. I don't need it to be any wider, it's fine. But and this is one of those bucket list plants in terms of, if I had all the space in the world, and space wasn't an issue, would I chop and prop this to make this into a humongous plant? Yes, 100%. But let's talk about the obvious comparisons that you're going to get with this plant. So I'm trying to think now that the biggest one is going to be why am I blocking? The Paraíso Verde. Do I have some Paraíso Verde? Is that Paraíso Verde there? Yes, it is. So water propagation of Paraíso Verde. Can you spot the problem with the Paraíso Verde? And I have talked about this ad infinitum on here. Paraíso Verde, for me, and I know there are ways around it, but I guess every time I mention it on videos, I am not the only one based on what everybody else is saying. It's not easy or straightforward to keep the variegation going on that one specific plant, the Paraíso Verde. Conversely, I have to do nothing. Nothing. And then it spits out leaves like this, and it grows fantastically. These leaves are a lot bigger and more paddle-shaped than the Paraíso Verde, so I will say that. I think the other one that some people might compare it to is the philodendron Ilsmanii, which I still think, I might be wrong, it might have come down in price, is still an obscene, maybe it's not an obscene amount of money, but it's still a lot of money. Now, I will say this, and this was an unpopular opinion from my part when I said this, when I finally saw an Ilsmanii at an event, and I was just like, ooh, I get to finally see an Ilsmanii up close, and I'd seen pictures of it, and I was a bit like, ooh, I don't know, I'm a reserved judgment until I see that plant in real life. I didn't like it, personally. I know people that have it, that love it, and this is not a judgment on you. For my personal tastes, I don't like it. I really, really don't like it. I don't know, and the more I keep hearing about the way and how much hovering and babying people need to do for the Ilsmanii, and considering that this plant, you do nothing, and as I said again, and I will say it again, it pops out leaves like this. They're not the same. I do realize the Ilsmanii is almost entirely cream, so what you would get, say with this leaf here, where it's very, very green and you get some speckling of cream, it would almost be the opposite on the Ilsmanii, where it would be almost entirely cream and you'll get speckling of green. Yeah, you would think, I know, and this is the thing, I'm just like, oh, it's going to be quite cool looking, it's going to look really interesting. But I don't know, it's one of those things, and I think this is the thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around when it comes to variegated plants. When there is that much non-green section as a standard, and you get the very small bit of green, it stops reading, in my opinion, as a variegated plant at that point, and it just starts seeming like this is just the pattern of the leaves. As in, like, if you think of a calathea, you look at most calatheas, you wouldn't assume that they're variegated, you just know that there's patternation that is happening normally on the leaf. Add that to the fact that the Houseplants can be very temperamental in order to bring out those types of leaves and not be fully green, which means that it is a true, I want to hazard a guess here and say unstably variegated plant. It's not worth it for me. It really, it's definitely not for that price. So, and I will benchmark this again because this might happen the same way that it happened with a lot of my variegated Adansonii. The reality is I didn't particularly like that plant. I still don't particularly like the look of that plant, but, and it's because I have got zero self-control. If at some point it drops down to the price where I can get it for under £10, so under double digits in the UK, even if it's a baby plant, would I try it? Yeah, because at that point the risk isn't too high and I'm just going to be like, you know what, if I don't like it, I haven't spent that much money on it and it's a baby plant, what's the worst that could happen? Whilst with this, you don't get any of that. So for me, far superior. Far, far, far superior. And there was the issue with the Houseplants when I was kind of talking about it and kind of going, I bought the Philodendron Snowdrift, which is giving very similar vibes for a fraction of the price. I prefer that any day of the week. But yeah, the Jose Bueno, or Bueno? I've always said Bueno. I'm probably wrong. I think it's Bueno, but far superior. And this is my entire video of me chewing my words from that original review and people were just like, just wait and you'll see what the hype is about. I can now see what the hype was about. I truly, truly love this plant. I don't have a lot of space for it, so it's going to stay where it is at the moment. And it is growing at the weirdest of angles. You can kind of, if I turn it around, maybe you can kind of see it's kind of going that way and then it kind of spirals around there. There you go, that might be a better view. Yeah, it grows weird. It grows weird. But let me put this down and let's talk through some of my final thoughts for this one. As I always have with my video, like me holding like relatively heavy plants. Granted, that was not in semi-hydro, so it's not quite as heavy, but after holding it for a bit, it gets a bit much. It's great. It's great. I don't know how else I can say this. Stable variegation. You don't need to baby it. As far as I'm aware, it is not chimeric or unstable. And I know those two things aren't necessarily synonymous, by the way. But it just does its thing. It does its thing. I'm looking at it because I've put it down. It does its thing. It grows consistently. I think even in the winter at this point, I've noticed. I will say for me, and I don't know whether or not this is going to be true for everybody, if you are going to get a rooted cutting or even just an unrooted cutting with a node, with a single node, it might be a while for you to kind of get it to a decent size. Just be patient with it. But again, based on the comments from that original review, that might have just been my specific plant. And it wasn't because, maybe you picked up when I said it earlier on, it wasn't because that one leaf on that node was highly variegated. It was pretty much, if I'm not mistaken, 95% green, and it had the smallest bit of variegation at the top, which again is one of the benefits of this plant, and which is why I want to say that it's more stable in its variegation. It came back and it pushed out all of those leaves. I couldn't really see any of that candy striping, the telltale candy striping that you get on the stem in terms of how it grows. The one thing I will say, the bottom of the stem now is very woody. So that does happen to that plant. It doesn't happen to all philodendrons, but it does happen to this plant. At least my one's done that. I don't know if yours does the same thing. But really, really good. Really, really good. It doesn't. I would hazard a guess with that one. I've never grown it in a household environment, but if you have, do let us know down below. I wouldn't imagine it's particularly fussy with its humidity levels either. My 2 cents on that. Based on how leathery and how stiff those leaves are, I wouldn't imagine. Maybe the question that I have for you, if you're growing it in regular household humidity, do the variegated sections of it do the browning thing that you sometimes get maybe with a Monstera albo, where it kind of browns off on the creamier sections. I'll be curious, but again, I don't know. I want to say this is full-on variegation with this plant, but the fact that the variegation color changes, like I was showing you before, from that cream to like a light green, maybe that's what changes it. I don't think this is a Polaroid variegated plant, which means that it starts off all green and then the lighter bits show up, much like the Adansonii variegated aurea, where it comes in fully green and then it will eventually go into a more variegated leaf. I don't think that one, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to think, I should know this because I've grown this for a long time now. This shows you how much attention I pay generally. It doesn't do that, so overall, I stick by it. I think this is one of the best variegated philodendrons out there. Easy, stable, consistent grower, probably propagates well, if not fast in my experience. But yeah, like if you're on the fence, especially if you're seeing a lot of these at the moment as baby plants and they're not that expensive, and I am aware that I am an enabler, I am owning it at this point. I apologize every time and I will keep apologizing for becoming an enabler, but this is a good one to try. This is a good one to try. Now that the price is a lot more reasonable, less of a risk as well, because do what I would do with the Houseplants. If it's cheap enough and you think you're going to grow it and you're going to like it, get it. I can pretty much guarantee, even if you don't like it, there will be enough people out there that will probably want a slightly larger plant by that point if you've grown it okay. And you can kind of trade with them or gift it to them. It's a plant that will definitely find a home with somebody. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover on essentially what it's me eating humble pie versus my original review. One, if not the best variegated philodendron, in my opinion, right now, based on what I know and what I've experienced. I hold the case that I might change my opinion in the future if I find one that's better. But for right now, one of the best, if not the best, variegated philodendrons. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.